this podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. And we do that every single week by sharing the stories and advice of those rocking it on the other side. And we also do that with our Crowbar Awards, which you can enter if you're an aspiring advertiser by heading to www.crowbarawards.com. And this week, we have a very special episode. We welcome on Kat Gordon, founder of the 3% Movement and a seasoned creative director. We discuss the challenges and pathways for breaking into this industry that we call advertising, with a special focus on nonlinear career paths and the importance of diversity in creative leadership. She shares her journey from starting in ad sales, something that I think I want to talk more about, but she started in ad sales to becoming a change maker, addressing the gender disparity in advertising's creative director roles. She explains the inception of the 3% movement, aimed at increasing female representation in creative director positions from 3% by building a community and showcasing the business case for diversity and creativity. We cover a lot, but mainly the impact of the 3% movement, including conferences and efforts to make the creative industry more inclusive. Kat also talks about the transition to virtual events during COVID-19 and the introduction of something new, a new chapter of the 3% movement, which we might be breaking, we might not be, depending on the timeline of this episode when it posts, but she's introducing a new element, and that is coaching, a coaching coalition to support creative leaders. She'll talk about that. We also talk about advice for women aiming to enter the advertising field and the significance of company culture when you're breaking in. It's amazing. She's amazing. You're going to love this. You're going to learn, and you're going to want to connect with her. You're going to want to check out those resources. We talk about it at the end of the episode, but we also will include her LinkedIn. And if you reach out to me, my name is Gino Schellenberger. You leave a nice review on Apple Podcasts, maybe on 5 stars as well. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn and you do those things, I'll do my best to connect you with her or any of our past guests. Can't promise, but I will make an effort for you. Now, on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. All right, Kat Gordon, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. It's so nice to connect.
Heck yeah. Super excited to talk with you on the Breaking and Entering podcast, where we give advice to students or anybody really that's looking to break into advertising. I kind of neglect the people that might want to be career changers or have graduated. So we got to keep them in mind as well.
Yeah, for sure. I know it feels like no one makes their way into our industry in a super linear, well thought out fashion. It always feels like there's some haphazardness to it.
Right. Because it kind of attracts, creative people are nonlinear. So that kind of makes sense. They might try other careers out, or they might discover this later on. It kind of advertising calls the people that are nonlinear. Is that fair to assume?
I think so. Yes.
Wonderful. So Kat, we're going to talk with you today about what you've been up to. You have quite the following on LinkedIn, so I'm a little nervous, but I know you'll be amazing. But we're here to talk about you and what you're up to, the 3% movement. I think you've been doing that for quite some time now. So yeah, do you want to kick us off and tell us about the 3% movement and what your goal in your career is today?
Yeah, certainly. So the 3% movement was a passion project I started in 2010 after having served as a creative director for many, many, many years. And there was this little stat that would get repeated now and again about how few women were leading inside creative departments. And the number was 3%, 3% of creative directors being women. And the longer I served in my career, the more that stat really mystified me, because I knew that the buying marketplace, the consumer marketplace, was not 3% female. In fact, it was mostly dominated by female influence. So the 3% movement was something I started to build community and conversation around. Why does this problem persist? And I call it a problem because the portfolio schools were graduating the same number of women as men, if not more women. So it wasn't a pipeline issue. And it was really an issue of believing that the myth or the kind of archetype of a creative leader had been kind of romanticized as a man and as a white man. And so 3% movement challenged that and brought together men and women and all gender expressions over the years to build the business case for the relationship between diversity and creativity.
Got it. So I love how you very clearly mentioned that it wasn't a pipeline issue. It was when women were in the industry, when they are in the industry, there are some barriers to grow. Is that correct?
Yeah. And also, if you think about advertising agencies, people that are creative directors, chief creative officers, it's a glory job. It's a very esteemed job. It's fun. It pays well. You get to meet interesting people. And so I think just a certain type of person elbowed their way into that role and left a lot of other people standing there who would have been happy to lead. And so that was really 3% movement was building community around why do we do this to ourselves? And is it serving our clients to have one kind of leader lead?
Yeah. And the stat was 3%, and that was the main problem that you noticed. So what did you do to combat that issue? What did the 3% movement, what does it entail?
Yeah, so it was mostly conference based. So creating community, bringing people together in a physical space to talk about all facets of creativity and to raise awareness of the fact that diversity is a multiplier around creativity. So these events brought together brands, clients, creative leaders, strategists, agency owners, people from the 4As that are, guardians of the industry's fairness. And we just had this incredible momentum where we started to have a lot of people that were sharing our vision for creative leadership that didn't look so one-dimensional. And one of the things I think we did very well is we showcased in our speaker lineup. Our events were very big. They had over 100 speakers, several day conference.
Speakers, wow.
Yeah. And we just the lineup of speakers was incredibly diverse.
Mm-hmm.
And people that came to the event, they just loved the quality of the content and the energized spirit of the people. And they somehow draw their own conclusions. Oh, wow, that was a really diverse atmosphere. I loved it. I felt more creative there. I want my office to feel like that. Why doesn't this feel like that? So rather than what I call PowerPointing people into caring, rather than just, because there are plenty of stats about how good diversity is for business. But rather than lead with that, we just let people have an experience of their own where they wanted to be in more diverse environments.
I like that. You said PowerPointing to persuade or to drive home a point. Sometimes you need to be in person. You need to be in that atmosphere. Is that what you're kind of hinting at?
Yes, and also not like hitting people over the head with data. We didn't bring people together and say, here are statistics about diversity and the business case for diversity, which can be made. We didn't do that. We just brought people together and had incredible discussions and speakers about all facets of the creative life and world. And those speakers were not all white dudes. There were plenty of really diverse voices, youth voices, older creatives, veterans. We really brought interesting people to our stage, and we developed a reputation for having a really, really dynamic, worthy event to attend. And people would come year after year, and we had incredibly strong sponsor support because sponsors wanted to be associated with that message and that mission. And so that was largely what 3% did. In addition to the conferences, we did did do some of our own research about things around company culture inside creative companies.
Mhm.
We created a certification program where creative companies could be assessed on key metrics. We did a lot. We attacked the problem from a lot of different angles. And then when COVID hit, we were, I think, in our year 8 or 9, maybe year 9, and we did pivot. We had an entirely virtual event for the first time ever, so that
Mhm.
people could attend. And the subject matter, if you recall, everyone was clamoring to figure out remote work, which has a real correlation to diversity in terms of who can work and from where. And we were able to have 10,000 people attend our event instead of 2,000 because it was a virtual event, and that was great. And then the next year was our 10th anniversary, and we did a hybrid event. So we had in person in Atlanta, and then lots and lots of people tuning in. But that was the point at which in year 10, I thought, excuse me, is this the right approach for the next decade of trying to reach our mission? In the first decade, we female creative directors got up to 29% from 3%. So
Mhm.
lots of momentum, lots of impact.
Wow.
But you get to the point where you think, okay, the events were really critical to build the community. But now what needs to happen? And so I really spent quite a bit of time figuring out, like, what is the greatest way I can serve against this mission I've started, and what is the greatest way the community can still have a sense of movement and progress.
Got it. And have you figured out kind of like the next steps, or you still
I
like
have. We actually haven't formally announced this, but we are launching a coaching coalition.
nice?
A lot of very senior creative leaders, myself included, Rob Schwartz included, who you mentioned, who connected us.
Yep. Shout out, Rob.
Sarah Watson, just lots and lots of creative leaders. Chloe Gottlieb have now become coaches, and I started to realize that if we have 29% women leading inside creative companies and intersectional leadership, and these people are entering workplaces that were not built by or for them, there's a danger of them shape-shifting into the old paradigm instead of leading authentically and making change and enacting their own vision. And coaching, to me, is the absolute best antidote against that. It's a way that you are super intentional about your values and your vision and how to have the impact you want. And yet, we did some research of the creative industry, and 42% of creatives have never had a single coaching session, and they perceive it would be too expensive. And almost all of them would welcome having coaching.
Mhm.
So 3% is now entering the space of coaching, trying to rebrand coaching, make the creative industries aware how valuable it is to leadership and diverse leadership, and trying to find ways to make it more accessible and affordable.
Interesting. Interesting. Got it. So you are the perfect person to talk to in general to help out our target audience of, people that want to break into this field. So you've been dealing with coaching when it comes to and helping the creative directors, and now you're helping the C-suite, I'm assuming too. So I want to kind of get your story and how you got here and all the bravery that it took to get you to where you're at today. And this is where our listeners could probably really resonate with you, is talking about how you broke in. So it's one of my favorite questions of the show. Can you tell us about how you broke into advertising and you decided one day that you wanted to create ads for a living?
Yeah, totally. Well, like we just said, it was kind of roundabout. I graduated from college with a double major in English and French, and I grew up in the New York City area, and I got a job working at USA Today newspaper, in the advertising sales department, just because they were hiring, and I had no job experience. I was a new graduate,
How is
but what
ad sales? I feel like that's a field that we haven't really uncovered. Do you recommend it still today?
It's so long ago that I was in that role that I suspect it's a very, very different model
Mm,
now. I mean, we were basically, first of all, USA Today at that point was only 5 years old, and it was a very novel media idea, a daily newspaper that was in color. And so there were a lot of people that wanted to advertise in it. Like if you had a movie premiering, that would be a great vehicle to have your ad appear in. But now I'm guessing ad sales is there's so many algorithms that find audiences for you
Right.
in all these different places. But USA Today was a fantastic first employer for me. It was a very young advertising sales staff. Advertising Age had just named it the Advertising Vehicle of the Year because it was, again, a new kind of novel concept. So I got my feet wet there, really liked the people I was working with, and then noticed that they had a creative services department and they were on a different floor. And I remember being intrigued by, oh, they take all the information about the readership of USA Today and create media kits and videos and interesting, lively things. And so I befriended someone in that department who was a copywriter. And I remember kind of cornering her in the ladies' room in the bathroom one day and saying, how did you become a copywriter? And we became friends. And she kind of was my first mentor. So while I worked at USA Today, I took night classes at the School of Visual Arts in copywriting, which was not a thing I knew was a thing. So to your question, I found out that advertising was a thing while I was working in ad sales. And the minute I understood what it was, I was like, this is the thing for me. Because I was always a great writer. I love to write. I love language. And that's kind of how I did it. I didn't get my first agency job for a bit. I stayed in the magazine business. I worked at Cosmopolitan magazine and then at Sports Illustrated as a promotional copywriter. I was able to get a copywriting job, but not an advertising copywriting job. And I didn't make the leap to agency life till I'd moved to the Bay Area. I think my first advertising job, I was 29 years old. So kind of a late bloomer. But again, loved it. Loved the variety of clients that we served. Loved just being around creative people in an energized, vibrant atmosphere. It was so much fun. So that's kind of how it was like. It's like baby steps, I took the job at USA Today because I thought, oh, that sounds like a dynamic, fun workplace.
Right.
Then once I was there, I kind of looked around and I was like, what are those people doing? And then, a friend there said, you need to learn more about this industry and take these night classes, which I did, and I loved them. And it's funny, I remember so well when I was a copywriting student going to these classes, the people that were teaching were, creative directors, some of them kind of esteemed creative directors in New York City, and they would kind of waltz in to teach. And so there was a little bit of hero worship happening there. And I remember at first when they would show some of the campaigns they had done or some of the work they were doing, you kind of thought, oh, I'll never be good enough to do what they're doing. And then I took classes for long enough that I remember I started rewriting some of their headlines in my mind, like thinking I had my own perspective about maybe how they could have done it differently. And that's really what creativity is. It's figuring out your unique viewpoint and how to make something compelling. And there's not just one answer, which is the beauty of advertising and creativity in general.
Totally. And I get worried sometimes that the portfolio schools today they don't teach. I'm not sure. I haven't been in one, but I see a lot of same looking portfolios. And that concerns me that they're losing their perspective. Yes, you need to know the fundamentals of like what goes into an ad. I understand. But when you start to lose your touch and who you are in the work and that's the creativity, really, in my opinion. So I want to make sure that students know the basics, but then also can put their backgrounds, the culture that they grew up in, and what they're interested in. Staying interested outside of advertising is super beneficial and important.
That's 100% right. And that's why the 3% movement was not just about there should be more women. It was about everyone has a unique lived experience that they bring to a creative ideation session. And you want people that have grown up in different places in the world and had different socioeconomic experiences and different cultural references. It just becomes this really rich, dynamic kind of pool from which to draw ideas. And if you just have a whole bunch of creatives that all look the same and kind of grew up in the same area and went to the same kinds of schools, you're just limiting the avenues for exploration.
Yes, totally. And I love how you noticed that you saw what you could potentially be interested in, which was copywriting. I love that you went to school and you worked hard. I'm assuming you worked 9 to 5, right? And then you went to night classes once to 5 times a week, whatever that might have been. But that just kind of shows like that recurring theme on the show that, you have to put in the work, and you have to, once you understand what role you want, then you can start to work backwards and see where you're at and what you need to create. So I love
Yep.
that. You said you worked at Cosmopolitan, and did you say Sports Illustrated as well?
Yes, both of those places.
Interesting. So I guess from USA Today, Cosmopolitan, Sports Illustrated, how did those shape your views on advertising and female representation? Did you notice stuff going on early in your career?
When I worked at Cosmopolitan, Helen Gurley Brown was still the editor in chief. And I don't know it, like a lot of your listeners might have to Google who that is, but she was a real founder or, feminist and editor in chief. That Cosmopolitan was the first magazine to even assume that single women would have a sex life and have career drive. And she was a really important figure in kind of women's growth and rights. So it was very amazing to have worked under her when I was so young and she was at the very end of her career. She worked well into her 70s, if not 80s.
Love
So I think Cosmo was an amazing opportunity to work somewhere that was all about female empowerment. And like Madonna was on the cover for the 25th anniversary issue. And then Sports Illustrated, obviously a very, very different kind of about face. And yet I will say that the creative services director that hired me, a man, um, he had a lot of women in his department at, Sports Illustrated, which you could argue has more male readers. But Time Warner at that time that owned Sports Illustrated, that was another excellent place to work. And this is something I definitely want to say, especially to the younger listeners, is some companies, when you meet someone at a cocktail party and you say, I work at such and such, and it sounds shiny and it sounds impressive, and people are like, wow. And yet the reality is some of your happiest jobs might be at quieter, sleepier companies. And the quality of your life is so much more important than the sexiness of your job title or the company. Bar none. I mean, the experiences you have, the bosses you have, the company culture, how they treat people is so important. And you can't always suppose that a company with an enormous name recognition or even having millions of employees, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good place to work.
So true. People get caught up on the names of the agencies as well. And I tell them, the leadership change, work with what accounts you want to work on, and then you can dive in as well into the culture and talk to the people that actually work there, because all those things, there's so many variables within agency life that are consistently changing, and I find it hard to keep up with myself, and I'm a journalist and I'm in this industry, so definitely a good point.
Yeah, I'm glad you're kind of also sharing that perspective, because we live in a world where we're all showcasing and merchandising our lives, kind of showing the sizzle reel instead of the documentary. And
Right.
you're going to live the documentary, so make it a good one. And I had a friend recently who worked at a very shiny company and had a very senior role. And she'd been offered a job at a company that was, well known, but not nearly as kind of impressive as where she was. And she was agonizing over what to do. And I remember saying to her, like, the only thing that matters is how your life will feel, not how it will look. And she ended up taking the job and loves it, loves her boss, loves the work they're doing, loves the vision for the company, loves how she can still be a working mother without feeling like she's cheating on the job. It's just
Right.
they have good balance. And so I love that you're also making that. I don't think there are enough voices kind of encouraging people to do the due diligence on the culture.
And it's hard. I understand. Like, what advice would you have for the person that's just graduating or is desperately looking for a job, like I was in that position, I would have taken anything. And sometimes with the market, it's hard to have that choice and to take that research. What advice do you have for the students out there today, and when they're, to find a better fit is an important question I want to ask.
Yeah. I mean, I think your first job is a unique situation. And no matter where you go as your first job, you are going to learn so much because it's your first job. And you might have someone that's your anti role model instead of your role model, but that's intelligence also.
Right. You'll learn from
That's
that.
you. Exactly. You're like, I don't want to be that kind of leader. So I would say for the first one, get some place that you're excited to work at. And then if it turns out that the culture isn't quite what you want or what fits for you, that's knowledge. That's part of your kind of growth as an employee, is you realizing, wow, I really think I fit better in a company that has better work-life balance or is more purpose-driven or whatever it is that fits for you. And then I think it's that second and third job where you can really get strategic about how can I find the culture that it's almost like you're creating a composite in your mind of all these attributes, and it's like a vision board of like the kind of company. And then just pay attention when you're listening to podcasts or talking to friends or anything to companies that telegraph that that's true there. And I'm a huge fan in sincere, specific fan mail. Write a letter, an email, however, get in touch with someone that's a creative leader inside that company you're admiring. Tell them exactly what you admire about their work or the campaigns they're producing. That gets noticed.
Tailored is so important of that, because there's a lot of the mass, like kind of like the copy and paste messages that we get. But when they do the research, they read a couple articles and they can pinpoint a quote you said. That really helps, at least for me. I'm assuming you as well.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, people are busy. And when I get something from someone that I know is sincere and that isn't a mass cut and paste, I want to give that person time, or I want to at least connect with them on LinkedIn. And so I think there's so much lightweight communication in the world right now that anything that feels analog and handwritten and specific.
Yeah. Just a little bit more effort, especially with AI and the ease of now to get mass information out. We can tell, right, when something has that little bit of effort in it, and it sticks out, especially now today.
For sure.
I love this. So I guess you've done a lot of these events, networking, mentorship, I'm sure has been so important in your career. And now with the coaching, even now more so. I want to talk about, for the aspiring women and that want to join advertising, I guess, what are some of the big lessons for them specifically on how they can enter and then stay in there and in advertising right away? Just like some good advice for the women out there.
It's interesting. When 3% did our own research, we did a survey called What Women Want, where we wanted to understand if women had different consideration sets for jobs, and especially if creative women had different desires, needs than women in media or account management or strategy. And what we found was that all the things that women said they cared about to make their job satisfying, all of them self-improved, if there were 25% or more women in the C-suite at that company. So what I'm saying is that the culture of the company self-corrected for women if women were leading at 25% or more. So I would say look for agencies that have good representation of women at the highest level.
Boom. How about Chicago's got a lot of women at the high level? That's for sure.
Good. Yeah. I mean, there are quite a few agencies that now have very good female representation at the highest levels. Look at Susan Cradle at FCB. I mean, there's a lot of Liz Taylor, especially on the creative side. There are a lot of women now. Judy John, like they're running the whole show,
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a creative, by the way, I don't want to flatten everything to be like only women can do things that women like. That would be way too simplifying the problem. But there is some truth to a C-suite that is diverse being better at creating conditions for diverse populations.
It's important to keep pounding that message because it seems so glaringly obvious, but it's not to a lot of people, and they might forget. So I love that you keep preaching that consistently, and I need to do that more so on the podcast.
Cool. We're in alignment.
Heck yeah. If you had to do it all over again, if you were just breaking into advertising today, would you still want to go copywriting?
Oh, that's such a great question.
It's a fun one.
Yes, I think I would. However, I'm envious that there are so many more tools available now for writers to also have a pretty proficient design sense. I mean, obviously, if you work in tandem as a copy art director team, you get, I have a much better visual sense than I did when I was 25.
Of course.
But I don't have the skills to quickly put things together that I need selfishly for 3%. I always have to hire a designer, and I wish I had more proficiency. So there's that. I also think strategy is a very, very interesting discipline that speaks to me too. So, but I think I would still go the copy route because I just love words. And I think back to when I was just starting to realize advertising was a thing, taking those classes. I still remember headlines that I read that I fell in love with. Like I remember one in the New York Times, there was a full page ad. Now I'm forgetting which restaurant it was for, but which is not the mark of good advertising, but it was obviously I was learning copy. So that was my filter. But the headline was, "We're not open for lunch. We spend all day making dinner."
There we go.
And I remember the feeling I had in response to beautiful copy. And so, yeah, I think I would still, because I always loved to write and had such a love affair with language, I think I'd still take that route.
I like that. And would you go, I guess, would agency route still be like your first stop in your career? Like would you try to get that right out of school?
I think the thing that agencies do that is so enticing is you work on a variety of things. And I love going to a meeting with a client from Microsoft and then later that day or the next day going to a meeting with a client from Wells Fargo. And just my curiosity was very intrigued and attracted to the variety of advertising clients. And I think that keeps your mind super nimble where you don't, if you work in-house, and there are certain life periods and seasons where working in-house makes sense, but you're working on the same brand or family of brands all the time. And I think for a creative person, that novelty is so energizing.
Yeah, I think that, I recommend people to start off in an agency, try it out, and then if they like to go niche, then there's avenues off of that. But there's nothing quite like that first agency experience to get you in the fire and get you all over the place and learn deep and wide. It's super important, I think, but not for everybody. And we talk about it every episode. So I'm hoping people continuously listen and kind of shape their own idea of where they want to start off. But Kat, where can people reach out to you and maybe find some of your assets, materials that you have all made, that research? What's the best route for them?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is I write a weekly Substack newsletter on the future of creativity. So definitely would love for people to read that. It's free. So that's at katgordon.substack.com. And, let me know what you want me to write about. That's something I love hearing from readers about. I loved this piece. Have you thought about writing about this? So would love to hear from some of your listeners. And then 3%movement.com. It's the number 3, the word percent, and the word movement, you can see a lot of the research 3% did over the 10 years that we were running our events. And we're on all the social channels. I actually have an Instagram called Coach for Creatives. So Coach number 4 Creatives. And 3% is on Instagram, 3%. I think it's 3% movement. And we're on LinkedIn. I mean, we're kind of everywhere, but I would love to hear from people, not just have people tune in. And I like the two-way conversations. So if your students have questions or ideas or observations, to, send me a DM.
I love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I want to talk with you after we're done recording here, but I hope people reach out. I hope they give you some ideas and start those conversations. And yes, it's been wonderful.
Thank you so much, Gino.